Hmm.
All right, Zoom is preparing live streaming preview.
Both of these wines are really good examples of it. They both got that stone fruit, peach apricot, a little hint of honeysuckle.
I like the aromatics
In
on
fact, they're very close.
It's interesting that I think you get more varietal character out of 13.7 than I did out of 15.2.
But Chris, God love his soul, what he has been doing is he's been picking about a third of the Viognier, at 22.5, 23, and then 2/3 of it up around 26. And it's keeping the alcohol down, but you're getting, I mean, Viognier, to me, it doesn't really jump up and bite you on the nose until it's at about at least 14.5, 15 alcohol. Because Viognier, it needs that ripeness to bring up that stone fruit character.
It's a very unusual, weird grape to work with, for sure. It's I've worked with Pinot Blanc, or excuse me, with Grenache Blanc and Viognier, and those are really the only two white Rhones that I've played with currently. And they both have that slip skin. So I mean, you're gonna get phenolic character no matter how you press it, unless you're gonna keep it under a 1/4 bar. And I still don't know how to press under a 1/4 bar. I mean, like free run is easy, right?
Well, I remember when I was using an impulse press, and we talked about slip skin, but Viognier and the Muscats, you know, you had to stand far away from the press because it was squirting at you right and left. I mean, it was crazy.
And the reason why Muscat is called Muscat or Moscato, which means the flies, because you know what happens when you start crushing orange Muscat. You better not be allergic to anything that stinks.
Anything that looks like a bit honeybee.
Woo! I'll tell you.
That's sweet. All right, looks like we are good, and we've got quite a few people on already to hear.
Wes, your wine is it's got I think a whole lot more. I mean, ours is mine. It's not mine. Chris's. I think the fruit's a little bit more forward. You got a little bit more complexity. There's some other things going on in this wine that are.
You know, it's funny. You know, familiarity breeding contempt. I immediately went to the aromatics in your wine and thought, oh, I kind of wish I had a little bit more of that kind of peach blossom, white flower, kind of terpene character. I get a little more terpene out of yours.
Well, ours I think is one of those. Hey, this is really nice. It's easy. It's really inviting, but in reality, you know, I think it's a little bit more simple.
So I'm going to interrupt you because
let's say this is a nice wine to sit around and have on the porch or have with some hors d'oeuvres. This wine is Wes, yours has got, I think, a little bit more dinner potential.
So Gary, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt because we're live, we're recording, we're live on Facebook now. We've got an audience. There's plenty of people on there. It looks like we've got a lot of our regulars back again. We've got Helen, we've got Steve and Martha. We've got a bunch of other people I've seen on before. Deidre is on again. Thank you for coming and joining us again. So, lots of people. Wow. All right, cool. Hey everyone, I'm Chris. I'm with the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance, and we are back for another hangout, another live hangout, and this is going to be a fun one today. You'll notice that there are only 3 squares instead of 4 because I thought, you know, these two guys, as you can already see, they're already talking, they're already chatting, and this is going to be a conversation that
we've been here drinking
for
2 hours.
2 hours.
Seriously.
I tried to tell Gary, I said, Gary, you know, we're going to try to keep our stories 3-4 minutes at a shot. He says, I can't say hello in 3 or 4 minutes. So Yeah, we're probably going to go long, people. So pour yourself a good glass. Keep that bottle handy because we're going to be going for a little while here. Let me go ahead and introduce who we got. We're going to have, well, actually, we're just going to jump right into conversation after I introduce them because in a way, these brands, they are iconic. So we've got Wes Hagen. He is the winemaker and brand ambassador over at J. Wilkes Wines, and he's joining us. I saw one of Wes's shows, Day Drinking with Wes. I saw that, and it was kind of the start of the thought of this show because the way he did it. I think I saw your very first one, actually. It popped up on my Instagram Live, and I was like, that's cool. There's no script. He's just hanging out and talking. I can do that, but I can do that with other people. So that was kind of how we started this thing. In a way, we had other ideas too, of course. And then we also have Gary Eberle of Gary Eberle. Yeah, like why am I introducing you now? Gary Eberle of Gary Eberle, an Eberle winery. Gary, the godfather of Paso Robles Wine Country, blah, 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 all that good stuff. You know, he's just a big, cuddly, big teddy bear is what he is. And I've invited him to be on the show today with Wes, thinking this is going to be a great conversation. What are we talking about? We're talking about alcohol, ABV, and why it matters or doesn't matter. I don't think it matters. When you have a balanced wine, it's a good wine, and that's that. Show over. No. So that's enough. Let's drink.
I'll drink to that.
As long as there's alcohol in it.
Makes me feel like Lee Marvin and Cat Ballou. Oh, I'll drink to that. Yeah, I'll drink to that.
So the impetus of this show, I was talking to Wes about being on the show, and he says, hey, Paso gets things ripe, and then there's this perception that, with all this sugar that we have high alcohol, but we're making really balanced wines in Paso. Let's talk about that. And great idea, Wes. Thank you. And thanks for being on the show. Talk about it.
Well, I am sick and tired of people telling me that wine needs to be made in a certain style. I'm sick and tired of people telling me that high alcohol wines are somehow profane, that somehow I think we got going with this in pursuit of balance thing, that the IPOB guys and women, obviously Letty Teague being an important part of that whole thing, kind of jumped in and sort of coerced or co-opted, I guess is a better word, co-opted the idea that balance means low alcohol. I think as human beings, we have been struggling for 10,000 years to make higher alcohol wines. The first wines human beings ever made were like Neolithic, kind of like Nouveau Rosé. They would have been foot stomped. The juice would have been basically fermented with whatever feral yeast was flying around from the wasps and through the sky. And you know what? They probably drank those wines wishing, gosh, I wish these could have more alcohol. Did you know that wine and wine grapes produce more disaccharide sugar than any other fruit on the planet Earth? So if you don't have a still, and remember, no European had a still until the 12th century, wine was the strongest alcoholic beverage on the planet Earth pre-distillation. Yep. No other fruit on the planet Earth produces more fermentable sugar than Vitis vinifera. So as a result, you can argue that sort of the Parker style, the big, rich, international style, and I am not a Robert Parker hater. And if we get into Robert Parker, I think the two greatest wine heroes in American history are probably Robert Mondavi and Robert Parker for two absolutely separate reasons. Robert Mondavi to get people to drink fine wine at table and to use wine as a gracious part of the human lifestyle. And Robert Parker, who got people drinking fine wine in the United States, talking about fine wine, separating the wheat from the chaff, saying, there's a lot of crappy wine out there. So here's some good stuff. And he hit the 82 Bordeaux on the nose and we got rolling. So I can argue the wines I love to drink have a sense of balance that I don't necessarily find myself excited by super high extract wines. But I have been surprised so many times by wines over 15% that were lovely and balanced and aged actually a lot better than I can. So again, I think to love wine, you should have an open mind. It shouldn't be like, I don't drink anything but first growth and Grand Cru. I drink and I travel the world in a glass every night, whether it's an 11% Riesling or a 18.5% Greenock Creek 2015 Barossa Grenache. That is the world record for the highest ABV of any wine ever produced in the world. 18.5 with natural yeast. I don't know what yeast they used, but
Cherry yeast.
yeah, Franken yeast. That's pretty much my feelings in 5 minutes or less.
Yeah. Well, and to me, so much of our industry changed. When I came out of Davis, I've told Chris, I said, we had 7 or 8 yeasts available to us, almost all of them from Scott Labs. And none of them were capable of fermenting fructose. So, there was no such thing as a dry wine. You always had 5% residual. Wow. Well, now, Chris has, I swear to God, he's got 80 different yeasts that, in the lab and in the big silver refrigerator, and he works with. And 2/3 of them will ferment fructose. So you're getting that extra shot of alcohol to begin with. We just had a bottle every Friday. Thursday or Friday, Chris goes to my home, goes down to my cellar, and he brings up a bottle. We started this about a year ago. And
for everyone at home, it's Chris Eberle, his winemaker, not me, Chris. Just
and he's not my son, my nephew, or we are not related anywhere we can find. It's just one of those fluky things. Gary Eberle, Chris Eberle, everybody assumes he's a relative, but I'm sure somewhere back in Germany he is, but not here. But
he's too good looking to be related to you, Gary. So
no, if he was my son, he'd be handsome. But he brought up an 82 cab, and it was a sweepstakes winner at LA County. It was one of 5 reserves I made, although he brought the estate, not the reserve. I made 5 reserves in the 80. And the alcohol was 12.6. And that was just fermented. Oh, where the hell did you get that?
Oh, I got things.
Holy shit. Okay. That was my 82 12.6. Yeah. And that's fermented well, it was there was no fermentable sugar because we were using Pasteur Red yeast at that time, and Pasteur Red would not ferment the fructose. If I had been using one of Chris's, the alcohol now would have been about 13.3. 13.2, 13.3. So the evolution of these, and people say, well, why do you use these new yeasts? Well, Pasteur Red, man, I tell you, it generated hydrogen sulfide like you can't believe. There were so many downsides to it. And now you get these new yeasts, and they will take, and I say, Chris, what the hell are you using 26 yeasts for this year? Because each one, he'll ferment 3 different lots of, Viognier or Cabernet with 3 different yeasts in different tanks, and you get different characteristics, and then you blend them together. And I think it's one of the reasons that we saw in the late 90s, early 2000s, such a really significant jump in the quality of the California and the industry winemaking overall, because the bugs we got to work with are so much better. I remember back in the 70s, oh, don't touch your face, Gary. You don't know where my fingers been. When Bob Travers first started coming out with these up on Mount Thomas Mountain, and started coming up with these big high alcohol zins, and almost everybody we looked at them and went, oh man, but it was Zinfandel. It's easier to get high alcohol zin, and then all of a sudden our industry towards the middle of the 80s, and I don't want to say Robert Parker didn't have an influence, because I think he did, but it wasn't just from Mr. Parker, started chasing higher alcohol. And I've had Zinfandels, I didn't make them, but I mean, it was Zinfandels that has so much alcohol that if you didn't like them, you can use them as a bathroom disinfectant. I mean, it would just, you know, frequently hot. But, you know, at the same time, Zinfandel was a good wine to use because one of the things that covers up hot and covers up alcohol is fruit. And that's why I think the Viogniers at 15 and a half alcohol, because of the fruit is there. Fruit covers up alcohol. It covers up a whole lot of alcohol.
Now, do you think, Gary, when those wines start to lose their baby fat and they get 3 to 5 years in the bottle, do you think those wines that were saved by the extract, when the extract falls off of that wine by virtue of something totally un-American, which is patience in the cellar, do you think that a 5 to 7 year old 16% Zin can still be in balance?
And I can only speak from my experience. And I mean, I've got every wine in my cellar that I've made since '76. At least a case with 2 exceptions, and those I've got 8 and 9 bottles respectively. Every Cabernet I've ever made, and I found pretty much balance in, balance out. Zinfandel and older Viogniers, again, because they tend to be higher alcohol, and the first thing that a wine typically loses is fruit. And when the fruit goes down, the alcohol does come forward. And I have found that, and I've got Viognier back to '92 and Zin is back into way back. And I found that with rare exception, you get a 10-year-old Zinfandel or an 8-year-old Viognier with high alcohol, they're not going to be nearly as attractive as they were when they were younger.
Yep. And I've found that alcohol in wine, I mean, it can be semi-preservative if the wine is in balance, and I could not agree with you more. I remember talking to Brian Babcock, who taught me how to make wine professionally back in 1996 when I worked for Babcock for a harvest, and he said 2 things that I'll never forget. One, well, he said a lot of things. Number one was that when someone says, oh, this wine needs to come into balance, it's a little hard or a little awkward or a little angular, that is not, chances are that's a selling point, not a qualitative point. Like if I tell you this wine's going to come around in 3 years, I'm trying to sell you wine. But we probably know, and I agree with Brian saying, the grapes have to be perfect. They have to taste delicious in the fermenter. They have to taste delicious during fermentation. They have to smell like blueberry pie. And then when they're done, they have to be delicious out of the press, delicious in the tank, delicious on barreling down. And then every time you taste them, he says, the greatest wines I've ever tasted have never been out of whack.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I go back, this was, Ralph Kunke and Dr. Amory and Old Cherry Cheeks when I was at Davis. And it was like the whole department. They said, as a rule, it's balance in, balance out. If you put a wine in the bottle, unbalanced for whatever reason, don't expect Mother Nature, and there are always exceptions to that, but don't expect Mother Nature to make your wine better if you hold it for 10 years in a proper cellar. If it's balanced, it has to be balanced in to get it balanced out. Now, it doesn't mean, if it's balanced in, doesn't mean that in 20 years it's still going to be a good wine, but it's got a much better chance.
Here's the $25 million question. I've had wines that are in balance as young wines, Pinot Noirs from the Santa Rita Hills, maybe from like Brewer, let's just take Brewer Clifton, 16.2%, full 100% stem included, 16.2% Pinot Noir, at release, balanced. I've had wines 14.8 at release, unbalanced. So it's not a numbers game. What do you think? I mean, we can't just say any wine over 15% alcohol is hot, because certainly they aren't. How does this work?
Well, I mean, you're looking, no matter what we say or do, wine is, from the time we put a cork in it, it's still a living thing. I mean, particularly, your reds, you've got, you got your beasts in there. You have so many phenolic compounds. People say, well, geez, this wine didn't have any sediment in it when you bottled it. But, well, hey, you get just right. You know, we can measure to the parts per million the amount of oxygen we put under the cork. You know that.
Yeah,
And the amount of oxygen with the phenolic compounds and the alcohols and the 8 organic acids and all of the different, I mean, every wine, every fermented beverage has every alcohol that is liquid at room temperature. I mean, you've got isopropyl and pentanol and hexane, and there's all this stuff that's going on, and they start condensing, and there's a constant change. Wine is a living thing. Reds especially. My basic philosophy in life has always been a wine's first responsibility is to be red.
That was Harry Waugh, 1954. The first responsibility.
Oh, really? I thought it was mine.
No, and then the second, you know what the second responsibility from Harry Waugh's quote? Second responsibility is it's Burgundy.
Oh, okay. No, my first rule is if you like it, it's good wine.
Yes.
And second, the wine's first responsibility is to be red. I mean, I left Charity Hospital in New Orleans, a doctoral program, to come to California to make wine, chasing Cabernet. Or actually, I was chasing Bordeaux's because in New Orleans in 1971, the only wine was French.
Yeah. Maybe
a jug of Parmesan or something. But,
on Wednesday, I did a full hour show on my show in defense of white wine. And I did everything I could for almost an hour to basically explain why white wine was better quality to price ratio and how white wine is more expressive early in the way that Americans drink wine. If we were in a culture where 90% of the wines are consumed within 48 hours of purchase, no red wines are being consumed at maturity. And as a result, none of the red wines are reaching a level of expressiveness that really show vineyard character the same way that white wines do. How about alcohol and whites versus reds?
I mean, we try to keep, actually, there are always exceptions in Zinfandel just because of the way it ripens. I mean, it's the Peck's bad boy of grapes in the vineyard. We try to keep our alcohol, particularly with the new yeast, in the mid-13s, and I think that's what we try to do. But I mean, you're right, Wes. I always tell people if somebody buys a bottle of wine on Friday afternoon, if it's still in the house Monday morning, there's been a death or a divorce. And and one of the things Mr. Mondavi, I've been very fortunate in that between Joe Paterno and Robert Mondavi and somebody you don't know. I've had 3 people that really helped me. And one of the things Mr. Mondavi, and I remember this day, because he used to sit out front of his winery and do the bullshit that I do. And he said, always make sure you've got a library and you cellar it well, because you're going to have people that are going to want to come down and say, it's my son's 40th birthday. He was born in 1985 or whatever. I mean, and I want a wine. Not a problem. It's not. You're not going to get it for the same price I was selling it in '85, but I've got it. And there's, like I said, I can pull up every vintage of Cabernet since '76, and most of them in large bottle formats also. But that's something Mr. Mondavi used to stress.
Now, so I went ahead and shared what we have today when you were talking about white and red and the like. And here's, we've got Eberle Viognier in 18 and 18 J. Wilkes Viognier as well. Then a Cabernet Sauvignon 17 from Eberle, and then a 16 J. Wilkes Highlands District Zinfandel. When we were talking about alcohol and this conversation, we were wanting to put forth things that maybe were a little different than, say, maybe what people are normally used to, or at least that mystique of what Paso is. Because when we travel around and we're talking about Paso, and I'm sure you guys have seen this too, especially over the years with you, Gary, running and being a Paso advocate, is that instantly people write Paso off as being high alcohol wines or maybe hot wines. And in my time at the Alliance now, promoting Paso Robles, I've definitely seen a decline in that. I definitely have seen how people are now taking our wines, you know, more seriously. And we have that, we showed that older bottle that was 12.6. So it wasn't always like that. There was just be a few bad eggs or something like that out there.
No, I mean, if you look at my wines from the 70s and up through the 80s, I don't think you'd find anything over a 13.5. And when I was wine, I mean, I quit being a winemaker, and in 97 was my last vintage as the winemaker at Eberle, although I still kibitz a bit. But the evolution of the new yeast has allowed, just naturally. And you say, well, why do you do that? Well, you're using this yeast and this yeast, and each of them give a slightly different character to a wine. And most of them are very nice. A lot of these are guys in Germany and the Pasteur Institute, and modern genetic technology in yeast cultures is unbelievable. And like I said, what we had available to us in the 60s and the 70s, I mean, it's like the Lamborghini versus the Conestoga wagon. Yeah. It's made a tremendous, and not just that, but there's so much that the industry has changed in the last 50 years that I've been involved in it, that and I mean for the better. I think this is so far this is sort of the glory years of the industry. I mean, it's amazing. I remember when we used to judge wines. I've been judging wines forever and ever. And I remember in the 80s and the 90s, you get a panel of
eliminate.
Yeah. No, it was like, you look at Dick Peterson's, and you would sit there and you would take, somebody put 10 wines in front of you, 3 or 4 of them, all you had to do was, and you moved it back, you moved it back, you moved it back.
Gary, what does DNPIM stand for?
Do not put in mouth.
That is the worst note a wine judge can make. That means that they didn't even put that wine anywhere near their mouth, that it smelled so damn bad.
Yeah, I mean, there were 4 out of 10 wines, you could just say, okay, that's not even a gimme bronze. I mean, that's a bad wine. Today, you sit down with 10 wines at these competitions, and even when you're judging, relatively inexpensive wines, they're sound. They may not be your idea of the best wine, but they're sound. They're not loaded with mercaptan or hydrogen sulfide. I mean, it's amazing the overall quality. And I don't mean just California or the United States, but the world has gotten so much better. I remember, drinking wines, and I'm fortunate, you're in this industry, you get to drink a lot of old, neat things. But I remember the Burgundies from the 50s and the 60s. And, I'm coming out of Davis, and, you've been introduced throughout the country, and hey, this is Brettanomyces, and you'd open up these old Burgundies. And I mean, you expect today, I mean, if I have a little Brettanomyces in a Burgundy, I expect it. I mean, if it was in a California wine, it's going to be written down. But in France, that's sort of, but they were so overwhelming in Brettanomyces spoilage. I'm going, how did people think these were great bottles of wine? And I was always amazed when I saw some of the really famous wine writers of the time writing about, the 50s and the 60s, the Burgundy. I'm going, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would say that the new world has given the old world the opportunity to clean up their cellars, to use ozone machines and cross-flow filtration and some of the amazing technology that's become popular. I like to look back at 2008 and say, what I recognize as a wine judge that's judged a lot of the same competitions you have, Gary, is that wines after the 2008 vintage changed substantially because of the world's financial situation. I just think every bad winemaker got their ass fired. And every person that was making substandard wine realized that it wasn't the vineyards, it was the chef. And that we have now come to this moment in 2020 where there's more financial difficulties because of the pandemic, but also we are in the golden age. Even before 2020, we were in the golden age. There has never been a time in the history of the world where wine hasn't been of higher quality and least price. I will argue that any bottle around $10 currently is better than the wines that were being consumed by the dukes and the duchesses, the kings and the queens of Europe in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century.
No question.
Yeah.
Winos under a bridge are drinking better wines than kings did 200 years ago. So
that's why you've seen me under the bridge a lot.
That's it. I knew you were a troll. I just knew it. No, but you know, it's just a matter of, wow, are we lucky to be living in a time where we can travel the world in a glass? We can do 150 countries, you know, in the next year for under $20 a night. And we can travel to those places and taste the actual flavor of liquid culture, which I think is just so important.
Hey guys, I've got somebody asking a question, and I think instead of just doing the question and that's it, I'm going to promote them to a panelist, and it's someone that you guys know. And actually, let's see.
Hopefully they showered.
There he is. And let's take him off of mute.
Boom. And
Teal from the Cork Dorks radio program.
But Adamant, why did you bring the, what do you got the riffraff in here for?
Oh, it's so good to see you guys. By the way, I totally detest both of these gentlemen. This is really the only downside to a show like this, Chris. And by the way, you're doing a fantastic job with all of these Zooms, but this one especially.
Thank you.
The only downside to a show like this is that it's not long enough. I mean, both of these guys are just so much fun to have, and you can listen to them talk forever in like a professional setting like this, or just like sitting across from them and just like hanging out. Oh, I got to get the quote right.
I just want to say one thing. Looking at you right now, I'm glad that penicillin cleared up that little fever blister you had.
And a little bit of the Conan hair. It's rock.
I know. I just got a black market haircut, like some black market cosmetology recently.
Dude,
So.
I had a flat top before COVID.
Yeah. I want to make sure I get the quote right. Winos under the bridge are drinking better than Duke and Duchesses of today. That was a great quote. Wes always has a great quote every episode. Okay, so let me say, you have 1% legally that you can mess with as far as the ABV. Have you ever heard or experienced the TTB audit or fact check a winery on their ABV? And are there ever decisions made in the cellar that would move one to want to do something either directly or just fudge the ABV a bit to make it more appealing to the market? And if so, are these decisions for the consumer? Maybe hypothetically, they're for the scorer, the wine buyer. I would love both of you guys to chime in on that.
Well, it used to be 1.5% variable. You could go up or down. And there's a rule, and it was really, at that time, it was BATF. And they weren't really concerned about it until you got up to like 13.8, 13.9. Then they wanted to make sure, because once you hit the 14, you got bumped into the bonus round as far as taxes. And they were very, very conscious of those wines. When you hit 14, your tax went up about 5 times what it was under at table wine. And that was, but I have not had a wine audited in 2 decades, so I don't know. I would say they've sort of walked away from it because so many wines were up, and we just, we put to the 10th what our alcohol is on the label, and if we pay the higher tax, which we just figure is part of doing business if we get something over 14.
Yes. I'm going to go ahead and agree. First of all, I have heard of audits, but I've heard that the only place that they pull bottles is from supermarket shelves because they're kind of lazy. So they'll go into a supermarket, grab 7 bottles and take them back and run them through an ebiometer, look at the alcohol level, make sure it's within the legal realm, and boom, you're fine. I don't think the TTB has enough time or people to be really doing that. And I heard about that back in the late 90s and maybe early 2000s, and I haven't heard anything since. So, you know, and I think that 14% is amazing. One thing about the Miller family that I'm really, really proud of is we have our own internal lab. We have 3 or 4 people working in our lab, and we're constantly testing our alcohol levels and reporting them absolutely accurately, the same way that we're doing the 0.1. And you know it because I'm going to teach each and every one of the people watching how to tell whether a winery fudges their wine labels. If you see 13.7 to 13.9 constantly, and you never see a 14 or 14.1 or 14.2, you might see a 14.8, you might see a 15.2, but it's never between 14 and 14.5, they're probably fudging because the yeasts are getting more, the yeast back in Gary's day, and I'm not being ageist, but they have changed. We're getting a transition or a conversion rate of about 0.5 to 0.55 between the level of sugar in the wine. So if the wine comes in at 20% sugar, 20 bricks, back in the day, it would come in at 10% alcohol. You use a modern yeast today at 20 bricks, you're going to get 12% alcohol. How the hell is that possible? Because Scott Labs and Yeast and all these other places are making the most incredibly efficient yeast they possibly can. So when I call Scott Labs and they say, hey, how can I help you? I'm like, do you have any lazy yeast? They're like, what? I'm like, I want a yeast with a 0.5 conversion rate. They're like, in 20 years, we have never heard one caller ask for this.
Okay.
And
you know, the one place where we must be accurate, because we sell, we're almost at 30,000 cases. We've tried to be there for the last 5 years, but we sell in 28 states and 3 countries in Europe. And when we go to Europe, it must be accurate. I mean, they won't accept your biliometer. It has to come from a wine lab, and man, it's got to be right on. Because if you send it to Switzerland or to Denmark and it's not right, man, you got yourself a real problem.
If someone is fudging, are they doing it for the wine buyer, or the consumer probably doesn't care, right? Or is it for the som, or?
I mean, you know, it's the law. It's just the law. And the other thing is, particularly now, Switzerland is nice. I mean, I love Switzerland's in my top 10 markets for the last 25 years. We've got a great distributor there. But the EU, when the EU went in and the different laws and the French and the Italians and the Spanish made the whole EU, you know, the same laws uniform, it created a problem. They don't want our wine over there. I mean, and I can understand that. I mean, it's, you know, we accept wines in here with essentially no tariffs, but when we go to Europe, it's one of the things that we're still, our wines are tariffed. And it's just another way, it's another add-on that we have to pay, you know, in the lab to make sure, because we don't want, trust me, I've had situations, well, hey, you said it was 12.8 and it was really at 13, and we can't, this wine is in quarantine, and what are you going to do about it? You need to send other labels over. Seriously. So yeah, but that's law, just silly laws, and they're old, and
I don't know.
Worry about it anymore.
There's an interesting question on that I thought maybe oh, I'm sorry, Wes, are you going to answer?
Well, I'm trying to think about why people fudge their alcohol labels. You're talking to 2 people that are going on basically saying, challenging the world, try to find one wine from J. Wilkes or from Eberle that's not within 0.1 of the actual alcohol. So you might be talking to the wrong people. I'm trying to put myself in the position of thinking, it would be to save tax money. If money's tight in a month, you might want to say 13.7 instead of 14.3. You're going to save yourself a hell of a lot of taxes. You're sending the wine to Letty Teague. Maybe you want to have a lower alcohol on the wine. Maybe you want to appeal to a European audience. Maybe you're looking to increase your exports to Europe or to other places that are more amenable to the European palate and a little more delicacy and elegance. But in the end, I think it's our responsibility as winemakers to be scientific and to give people accurate scientific information about the wine. It's on the label, and it's basically saying this is what we are declaring to the world about the truth of our wine. And if it's not truthful, I think maybe you should find a producer that trusts you as a consumer a little bit more to understand the actual alcohol within the wine.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
We've got an interesting question that I'm going to kind of modify a little bit here. And it's basically asking about native yeast and how we're talking about commercial yeasts. However, where I would like to take that is, they ask what the prevalence of one type over the other is, but I think modifying that question would be native yeast. Using that, how much are you really rolling the dice then at the end of the day as far as what ABV is going to come and kind of turn out to be? Or is it at this point in time, native yeast is just, it's still working and it's still, doing what it needs to do?
If you're going to use native yeast and you're going to roll the dice, if you go to Vegas, you're going to be a loser. The native yeast, I'm always amazed at guys who, get into this business as home winemakers or everything, and they look, it's romantic to you. I'm sorry. Our whole industry, there's so much bullshit in our industry. And native yeasts, yeah. Our ancestors got drunk on native yeast, and it wasn't what they got in the, when they were fermenting. It was the fruit that hit the ground and started fermenting. And, they would come along, and it's just like the cedar waxwings eating the pyracantha berries and then getting drunk and falling out of the trees. Hey, there's alcohol there. But native yeast will create alcohol, but they create a whole lot of other things that you don't want in your wine.
And I'm going to go.
And anybody that's using native yeast, in my opinion, and they, and I know some people that swear by it, I think they are severely brain damaged.
Dame Bramage. Well, let me go off on Dame Bramage for a little bit. First of all, there's no such thing as native yeast. Everything is feral, and everything comes from the gut of a wasp. A couple of Italian scientists have just discovered that how yeast overwinters, because yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, will not actually overwinter in a normal cold environment. So they found that it's actually overwintering in the gut of specific wasps and yellow jackets. And these yellow jackets move into the vineyard and spread this yeast. Every yellow jacket on the planet Earth is born with Saccharomyces cerevisiae in its gut. And this is really, really interesting stuff. So these bees are moving these yeasts around. Where do the yeast come from? Well, they could have been truly native, but what I'm going to suggest is when anyone says native yeast, I would suggest you say, don't you mean feral? Because what we're getting is whatever yeast is in the environment. Is it Saccharomyces cerevisiae from California? Probably not. Is it Saccharomyces cerevisiae at all? If you are allowing the native yeast the feral or native yeast in your winery to complete fermentation, if you've ever used Saccharomyces biennis or Concae or any of the other yeasts that are far more aggressive than cerevisiae, well, you have just, whatever yeast you have used in your winery that is the most aggressive yeast you've ever worked, that's what's going to ferment your wine, not what came in from the vineyard. If you want to use some idea, some romantic idea that the wine, the grapes come in with these beautiful native yeasts on the skins, which is true because the bloom of the grapes will attract yeast because of a sort of ionic charge. But it's not that. It's whatever is in the winery. So if you've ever used a biennis yeast, that's what's going to take over your winery. So I believe that letting a fermentation start on whatever yeast is in the winery is fine. But then once I start seeing it starting to warm up, I'm going to inoculate with whatever yeast I think is going to make the most beautifully commercially acceptable product. Because my job is not to reinvent the wheel. My job is to provide wine for people at table.
One thing, you must have taken Ralph Kunke's couple of his courses. I remember.
I judged with Ralph twice, and he wrecked me in such a beautiful. The first panel I was ever on. Are you ready? Ralph, Professor Emeritus, Cal State Fresno, Heidi Peterson Barrett, and her father Dick Peterson. Those were, and I was 25 years old.
It's a good palate. It's my dad and my sister.
And I said, the only thing I know about wine judging is I read Food on the Plate, Wine on the Palate by Max Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And this was back in the day where Max Lake used to come and judge LA International because he couldn't get Viagra in Australia. True story.
One of the things I've done traditionally when you're introduced to the competition, and they ask you to stand up and introduce yourself. And one time, and Heidi was there with Dick, and I stood up and I introduced myself as, I'm Gary Eberle. I'm Dick Peterson's illegitimate, very handsome son.
Yes, I was there.
And, it was fun. But after that, Heidi started calling me bro. And Heidi and I made a wine called Sibling Rivalry, which was a paradigm from her place and some of our estate. And that was a lot of fun. But no, yeah, that's fun. But the real exception to the native yeast, and this I think is almost legit. But you go into Burgundy and Bordeaux and the old Italian and Spanish vineyards, where when people would make their wine and they would work with the yeast and something that would eventually overwhelm and become, but they would take their pumice and they would spread it out through the vineyard. And eventually the Faro yeast was actually this yeast that they had been using for 10 decades or a century, and had been, it became the dominant yeast, which was good. In the New World, we spread our pumice in the vineyard every 5 years because we don't have enough, and we stockpile it until you get enough where you could justify putting loads and loads of it into a manure spreader and spreading through the vineyards. But we're at that time we're spreading 25 different yeasts. So no, we inoculate big time. We want, when Chris says, I want, this is what I'm trying to do with this lot, this is what I want to do here, boom. When I made Muscat, back in the 70s, I used Epernay too. I mean, it was a cold tolerant yeast because we could ferment at 49 degrees and it would keep popping. Now Chris says, I say, are you using Epernay too? He says, oh man, no, I got 3 different lots. I got 3 different yeasts, and they add a little of this. So,
I've got a really interesting yeast question for you. Do you think that in the new world we're so are sort of interested in using different yeasts because instead of making traditional blends, we generally make varietal wines? So we want to look for ways that we can get complexity out of a single varietal, out of a single vineyard?
Sure. Yeah. And the other thing is too, is that, when we started our industry in the New World, and I'm talking, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, South America, the United States, Europe had a tradition that went back centuries, millennia. And, what did we have to offer? How could we improve? And the thing was, there's so many, and I remember, traveling in Europe in the early 70s, and I was appalled at the wineries and how dirty and ancient and run down. I mean, the equipment, I was going, man, I wouldn't pump water with that pump, let alone wine. In the New World, and we were very fortunate, and most of our technology came out of Germany and Italy, but we benefited from having new wineries and the new technology and the new science that the industry, and now you can't tell the difference between, the the new European and the new world wineries. They've adapted that, and they've picked up a lot of the science.
Two quick
We've
things.
got another question from, oh, by the way, hang on. Adam, you feel like staying on? You can stay on if you.
I'm totally enjoying. I'm totally down to stay on. But if people have me, I'm totally cool to be here. I love this.
Why not? Why not? Why not? Stay there. For everybody, Adam,
Get him off.
the radio show
Just
host.
cut him off.
He's a local radio show host who hosts a show called The Cork Dorks, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Adam a long time and doing the show with him. And
Chris is the third dork.
I am on the
You're
the honorary third dork. That's
You've been
right.
there since the very beginning, 10 years.
I think we'll do a show. Let's do a show, a Cork Dork reunion show.
I love it.
Right? All right, right on. Anyway, hang on a second here, you guys. So we've got a question from Facebook Live. It says, in British Columbia, brewers are making many types of barley wine, some as high as 11.5% ABV. They want your opinion on them using the term wine in their marketing strategy because they think they're just strong beers.
I could really care less how beers. I drink a hell of a lot of beer. I'm a huge beer fanatic. I travel all over the United States tasting beer from Treehouse all the way down to, in Boston, all the way down to San Diego. Damn, we are in another golden age of beer, and American craft beer is basically changing the world of beer anyways. And so I have absolutely no problem in whatever you want to call your alcoholic beverage. If you want to include the word wine on it, I get it. I mean, barley wine, if it's going to have, I would say
you can call anything wine as long as you say it's barley wine. Or up in Alaska, there was a guy making wine out of milk. Tedeschi over in Hawaii making pineapple wine.
Yeah.
But if you just say wine, it has to be grapes.
Yeah.
Although I wish they would call sake rice beer, because it really is not rice wine. And feral yeast, again, I think in Belgian beer and as well as in sake, that really runs the show. So that was what I wanted to integrate. But yes, I have no problem with any beer that makes me happy.
We had an interesting conversation choosing these wines and why, and I thought now we can maybe transition into talking a little bit about the wines that we're having. And I'm sorry, everyone at home, that you're not enjoying these amazing wines right now with us. But with this particular topic, I was hoping that both Wes and Gary would be able to talk a little bit about these wines and why they were chosen for this very specific subject of alcohol. We have the Eberle once again. Actually, I'll just pull up the picture. But maybe, Wes, would you like to kind of start talking a little bit about it, and I'll pull the picture up of the wines that we have?
Yeah, so I brought the 2018 J. Wilkes Viognier Paso Robles Highlands District, as well as the 2016 J. Wilkes Paso Robles Highlands District Zinfandel. Paso Robles Highlands District is one of the 12 AVAs that were sort of approved simultaneously. It's the southeast corner of the Paso Robles, sort of, it almost kind of looks like a map of Texas. So if you can imagine sort of East Texas and down sort of, it kind of is in that kind of position. Highest average elevation of any of the 12 specific micro AVAs within Paso. It has one of the highest diurnal shifts of any area in Paso. So hot days, cold nights, the average diurnal shift is 50 degrees, which is the highest diurnal shift of any AVA that I know of in the United States. What I wanted to do is bring wines that showed that I don't have a horse in the race. I wanted to bring the highest alcohol white I have ever made. And that is, there it is. The highest alcohol white I've ever made as a professional winemaker in the last 20 years is the wine in my glass. It's 15.2% alcohol. It had nothing to do with me trying to posit a style upon the wine. It was a matter of me as 20 years as a professional vineyard manager and viticulturist walking into that field and asking myself, at what perfect moment can I capture these grapes? Because the moment you pick the grapes, I'm not really into being a hands-on winemaker. I want to let the place really show through the wine. So we picked this wine around 25 bricks, and at 25 bricks, the conversion rate we got to a dry wine ended up at 15.2 alcohol. I also have a very, very strong belief that if you are going to adjust a wine, it has to be done as juice and never wine. And we made the decision early on not to adjust anything in the wine, no water adds, no acid adds. So the wine ended up around 6 grams of titratable acidity and about 3.35 pH, which has plenty of acidity, plenty of verve, plenty of cut, plenty of liveliness. And the alcohol just ended up being pretty high to get the Viognier where we thought the fruit was phenolically ripe. On the other hand, in 2016, even though 2018 was a cooler vintage probably, 2016, the Zinfandel came in at 22.8 ripe. The skins were pliant. We're starting to see even a little tiny bit of, I've never really seen any dimpling at around 23 bricks, but we were seeing really ripe flavors and great kind of a ratio of flavor to sugar level. So we pulled the trigger at 22.8. And we ended up with making a Paso Zin. Is it possible under 14% alcohol? And we certainly did not 13.9 to save some money on taxes. We said 13.9 because that's the actual alcohol in this wine. And I love the fact it has no raisiny character. It has no porty character. It's all about, like, if I was going to use this wine in a class, I would say, you want to know what raspberry esters smell like in Zinfandel? Open this bottle and check it out, because I am absolutely totally stoked. And the wine won gold medal at the Orange County Commercial Wine Competition, which I'm very, very proud of.
Wes, how do you check?
You weren't judging there, right?
Good raspberry.
I was a judge, and I don't know if I knew my own wine, but they try not to put your own wines on your panels, but sometimes you get them in the sweepstakes rounds, and you never know which wines are yours. If you want to be humbled in your palate, try to figure out which wines are yours in a lineup, and very commonly you will fail.
It's hideous. I mean, I've judged. I'd say in a typical year when I was really doing the most, I'd do about 10 competitions a year, and I've judged a lot of my wines, and I've been able to pick out my wines out of maybe 1,000 competitions 4 times.
Yeah.
Where I knew, I mean, there have been times I say, hey, that could be my wine, but that could be my wine. And that one sort of looks like, but 4 times I've done it.
Yep. For me, it will always be like
They all
Grenache.
got golds.
Very well done. But yeah, it'll be like Grenache Blanc. 3 Grenache Blancs, and that you didn't actually run yours through.
Hey, when I was back in the 70s, when I was making Syrah in Orange County, Syrah, a class of 1. Oh man, that's a gold medal wine.
Oh, that's a beautiful wine. My goodness, more people should be using this gorgeous own varietal.
Adam, you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering because Zinfandel ripens unevenly, and on the same cluster you could have raisins, you can have green berries. What berries are you checking the bricks at to make sure it's ready to pick? The ones that look perfect, or
I do cluster samples.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the
Zinfandel, you have to do cluster samples.
I do a 15 to 20 pound sample on everything that I do. And the way that I do it, I have a proprietary method where I choose a random number between 5 and 13. And I go that many rows, that many vines in, and that many clusters in. So 5 rows in, 5 vines in, 5 clusters in, pick a cluster, then turn and go to the adjacent row and choose a cluster that balances the cluster I chose. Then choose a random one, and then choose a cluster that balances the cluster I chose. And I do this until I have most of an entire, Homer bucket full of grapes, go back, crush it, let it soak overnight with a little potassium metabisulfite, and then test that juice as it's soaked up for the red grapes. And with the white grapes, I would test that. And the key is Zin or any other grape, Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, Barbera, that has big ass clusters. You really do need to use the whole cluster, because, and the problem is if one berry on that cluster is 19 bricks and one cluster on that, on that one berry on that cluster is 25, it looks like 22, but you'll get all the shrill acid from the 18, and you'll get the overripe flavor. So the the hobgoblin of the production of the best wines in the world is uniformity of ripeness from the top of the cluster to the bottom of the cluster, which is one of the hardest things to do in the art of viticulture.
Over the years, 50 years, I've made wine and grown a tremendous number of different varieties. When I was at the Australia, we had a 1 acre, about a 1.5 acre block. We had 48 different varieties planted that we made. Tom Myers and Kurt Lorenzi, Chateau Curtin Tom would make wine from. And I've never, ever experienced a vinifera grape that has more bad habits in the vineyard than Zinfandel. And the only, people say, well, we tried to do it in Australia, we tried to do it here, the only reason that Zinfandel succeeds as well as it does in California is we have no humidity. Because you get just a hint of humidity, a little bit of water, Zinfandel just rots.
Sour rot.
Chile and California it's the only place that's really going to do well. And unfortunately, it's one of those things. There are varieties like Chenin Blanc and some other varieties that you don't want to plant in Paso Robles. But certainly Zinfandel, California is, I would say, very fortunate in that. And it had, you go back to the gold rush days. One of the reasons that Zinfandel became so popular, it throws a big crop, it throws a second crop when the first crop is frosted, and it throws a tertiary crop when the second crop gets frosted. And the tertiary crop is the best balanced. Because Zinfandel will hang more fruit than even the trellis can support, let alone the vines. It's just got so many problems.
I'm going to hope that Gary will talk a little bit about Viognier. I'm going to run real quick, take a quick bio break. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Oh, hey, you're going to convert into Chardonnay.
That's Toby's line, isn't it? That's a funny one. Hey, Gary, talk about your Viognier and talk about the Cab, which is basically like, the flagship of the Eberle wines.
Yeah, well, we're very fortunate in that for a winery of our size, close to 30,000 cases, in the last 5 years, I don't think we've had a single wine that we had 12 months supply of. So everything, we're like right now, the 2017 Cab we're pushing it. We'd like to have it through the end of the summer, and it will get to the point where Stacy won't get any of it for wholesale at all, and it'll be strictly a tasting room item, because that's where you want to sell your wine, is in the tasting room. But, I would say at any given time, like right now, if you go into our tasting room, and we have the sheet, people are buying wines all the time coming up in the parking lot, we got maybe 9 wines. Well, we've got, in reality, about 15 wines that we make, but, they go so fast. Cabernet, like I said, when I left Louisiana, I came to Davis to learn how to make Cabernet, and it was so crazy. I was a National Science Fellow, one of very few in the United States, the only one in Louisiana at that time. And my whole background was science, and I had never seen a winery except in pictures. And I picked up, and my professors couldn't believe it, because I'd published a couple of papers in genetics and journals. And I said, no, I don't want to be a geneticist. I want to be an alcoholic. And I went to Davis and never looked back. It's the single best decision I've ever made in my life. Well, there was this girl, Kayo, back at Penn State.
Gary. So one of the other kind of topics of this whole thing about alcohol has also been kind of how people make buying decisions, right? People, maybe they're making those buying decisions because they want a lower alcohol wine. And I guess where I'm going with this is, and this is something that Wes and I kind of talked about as far as these buying decisions, that how do we help a consumer maybe understand that just because the number might be high that they need to take a little bit more time than in understanding the wine better? Like how do we do that in our industry? How are we trying to impart that kind of information?
Well, I'm thinking about confusion, and I'm thinking the most confusing labels in the world are German Riesling. So the German Riesling folks are trying to make labels that show a bar graph with a continuum to say level of acid, level of sugar, level, different levels. So the question is, how are we serving the consumers by giving an exact percentage down to 0.1 of the alcohol by volume in this wine? Now you don't have, I don't know if the label laws are the same, but when I was growing up, you didn't even have to put the alcohol on the label if you just labeled it as table wine. But the problem was, if you label it as table wine, it's considered an inferior product. So what if we offered American winemakers an option to classify our wines by alcohol level, say, I don't know, 10 to 12, 12 to 13 and a half, 13 and a half to 15, and 15 and above? Would that give them, if there was just a terminology, I mean, just some term for the wine that would recognize, the wine would be like, low ripeness, moderate ripeness, high ripeness, instead of giving a percentage of sugar, and maybe somehow make a symbol for it. I don't know. I don't know, Gary, what do you think?
I mean, I've had wines that were under 13 alcohol, and you taste them, and they're just hotter than hell. They've been, things with a lot of pressed wine, a lot of phenolics, and those, when their phenolics are young, they're single short-chained phenol rings, and they're hot. With age, when they condense and form longer chains, I think some of the old Burgundies actually become almost macroscopic, and it gives you that silky sensation. But a wine can be low in alcohol and very high in phenolics, and it's still, you think it's high in alcohol, but it's really the phenols that are hot in your mouth. I think, there's so many damn different variables in wine, the organics and the organic chemistry that is going on in a living product. I think it's difficult to try to put on a label what this wine is, because in 6 months, it's not that wine, it's a different product. I think, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, one of the things that I find so exciting about wine, particularly wines, like the good red wines, is the way that they do change in the bottle, and even in your wine glass. I mean, you take a good Cabernet and you put it in a glass and you taste it and you set it aside for 15 minutes and you come back, it's different. And in another 15 minutes, it's different again. Some of the exceptions, well-made Zinfandel, Zinfandel that we just said, oh my God, you get the raspberries in there. Oh, Zinfandel comes back every 15 minutes like a ball-peen hammer between the eyes. It's raspberry, bang! Or Cabernet, Syrah, Pinot Noir, they change so dramatically in the glass, Cabernet especially.
Now, here's, in the sense that wine is constantly changing, is the fact that wine is intellectual, wine is difficult, wine is complicated, if we are trying to simplify it for a customer or for a certain cohort in the market, are we taking away the opportunity for experimentation and discovery? And I feel, as sort of a self-proclaimed intellectual, because no one else will proclaim it, that wine is it's my search. It's me looking. It's me experimenting. I don't, part of me wants to say no one needs to explain wine. If you want to jump in with us and have some fun. I guess the question is, at what point are people responsible for their own wine education and understanding what their palate wants and what numbers on the label might influence those decisions?
Yeah, well, it's just, like I said, earlier, my 2 rules in winemaking. Number one is drink what you like. Don't let an expert or a winemaker tell you what you like. I mean, every American knows what their favorite soft drink is, what their favorite beer is, what their favorite hamburger joint is, what they, I mean, the best, you have your taste. Why do you need an expert to tell you what you like in wine? Our industry has been dominated, I think, too long by people that try to make you think that what they like is what you should like. If you like it, drink it. If you don't like it, don't. If you want to have a good German, Qualitäts wine Riesling with a great steak, go right ahead. I just don't want to come to your house for dinner. But don't be, there's so damn many rules. It's a beverage. It's something you are going to rent for 5 or 6 hours. You're going to take Cabernet and convert it to Chardonnay in about 6 hours. Don't be intimidated. It's a beverage. It's something that makes life easier. It makes mother-in-laws palatable.
And with that, we have gone long. We're a little bit into 4, and we typically try to end the show a little bit before 4. So I want to thank my guests today, Wes Hagen with J. Wilkes Wines. Thank you so much, Wes. Eberle Winery. Gary, thank you. And Adam Montiel.
Yeah, baby.
Wait, was Adam here?
Great job, guys. It was so nice and fun to be here. Happy Memorial Day weekend.
Happy to you.
Adam, it's good to see you with your clothes on.
Yeah, you don't know if I had pants on. This is Zoom, right?
Hey, I'm hoping.
Why didn't get up like Wes did?
Hey, the reservoir is filling up. We just finished doing all the spring cleaning. Oh yeah, it'll next weekend it'll be full. The swimming land.
I will be there by next weekend, by the way. Yeah, okay. So as long as those fish are biting and the kids in the pond, I'm in.
The fish and the turtles.
Oh,
good. I'll be sure to wear swim trunks this time. Gary, Wes, thank you so much again for being on with me. I really appreciate it. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sticking on a little long. Hey, our website, I need to update it because I don't have the next few shows listed on there. My apologies, but I had a little home emergency today with a water heater going out, and I didn't get to that. So I will get to that next. We do have a show coming up on Wednesday. Once again, that show is going to be about barrels and about basically barrel selection. We'll have 3 winemakers talking about what goes into that process. Then the following show after that is going to be military kind of themed, where we're going to have 3 ex-Navy men on talking about why their time serving our country, or how their time maybe serving our country has influenced their winemaking. And so we'll see that next Friday. So we've got more shows in store, also all into June. We're going to keep this up. Thank you again for joining me. Bye.
Cheers.
Love and kisses.
Love.